We want to acknowledge the different firefighters unions that are here also, from Montclair, Belleville, Clifton, Bloomfield, and Weehawken. Montclair Democratic Chairman Al Smith is here. Nancy Miller, the New Jersey State AFL-CIO Community Service Coordinator. Thanks for coming, Nancy. Essex County Commissioner of Elections, Danny Williams. A member of the Montclair Civil Rights Commission, Barbara Chasen, is here. And John, let me see if I get this name right, John Abion, Vice President of North Teachers Union, is also here. Thank you for coming. One of the acknowledgments I want to make is Tom Giblin is here. He's the State Democratic Chairman, the Essex County Democratic Chairman, the head of the West Essex Labor Council. He's been a tremendous help to us, advising us along the way. I want to introduce Tom here and say a few words, and he will introduce the Congressman in a second.
First of all, let's really extend our thanks to Don DiGeronimo, because he's really the organizer and made this event happen today, and he works throughout the year about trying to bring all of the workers together here in Montclair. And I know you'll probably be hearing from him later on, but another leader in our state, the President of the New Jersey FMBA, Bill Lavin from Elizabeth Fire Department. My remarks are very brief because we have two excellent speakers in Congressman Bill PASCRELL and Assemblywoman Nia Gill. I think it's important for all of the members of the labor movement in Montclair and surrounding communities to have this opportunity to get together, look at some of the issues that confront us on a daily basis. This is kind of a changing workplace, as we all know. Things that we kind of took for granted for years upon years. We see today that we never used the word never, that there are definitely changes in the workplace, and it's important that we look at things and protect those things that we took so many years and decades to achieve. And with our speakers this morning, we have two persons who have great credentials as far as working families are concerned. Bill PASCRELL, Congressman Bill PASCRELL, has a long career in public service. Prior to his election to Congress several years ago, he served with distinction as Mayor Patterson, and also as a member of the New Jersey General Assembly. In his role as Mayor of Patterson, I know that he understood firsthand some of the issues that surround municipal employees. He achieved a reputation as a fair individual, which is all of us is what we really want in terms of dealing with our public officials. Bill worked as an educator, as a graduate of Fordham, and certainly will bring a great insight to today's session. Nia Gill was just elected to her fourth term, I guess it is, the way time flies, representing Montclair. Nia, a person who has strong ties to the Montclair community. In the legislature during her tenure, we can always count on Nia to be out in the forefront about trying to address issues that affect public employees or people in public safety or working families. So I think we have a great team in terms of Congressman Bill PASCRELL and Assemblywoman Nia Gill, and I'd like to call them up at this time to present their remarks. And also, I believe there's going to be a question and answer period about some of the matters that are important to the individuals in the audience today. Congressman Bill PASCRELL.
Folks, good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with Nia. We served in the General Assembly together. She's very outspoken, a real individual. She'll always tell you what's on her mind. In fact, Nia, this is what's needed in government service today. Because I think too many of us, we politicians, those folks who run for public office, are been tuned in and educated to tell you what you want to hear. Of course, we tell you what you want to hear just before election time. And then after the election, if you're lucky to find us anymore and track us down and say, remember what you said during the campaign? I said that? So I want to say I'm honored to be with Nia today, and you cannot find a more forthright public servant in this state. And many of you know me, I say it like it is, and I would only say that if I meant it. Nia, I'm honored to be with you. Let's give Nia another round of applause. I want to be brief, and because I want to get to your questions, which are more important. There's a staggering $12.5 billion property tax bill in this state every year. And we need to address that. We need to address the fact that there are 566 municipalities in this state. Districts. And when you include the number of school districts, it becomes even more staggering. But I want to go to the very heart of the issue of regionalization, shared services, privatization. And as far as I'm concerned, I've held the same position over the last 10 years, and that is, whether it's a public or private situation, to begin with, privatization should only be a last resort because it is an attempt to cripple collective bargaining agents and unions, period. That's it. Does that mean, I mean, we had some characters talking about privatization of police and fire department 5 years ago. I remember, when I was still Mayor of Patterson, going to the League of Municipalities and people talking about, we're going to privatize the firefighters and the patrolmen, and we're going to privatize our jails. In fact, in some states, they started to do that. But what we've seen as the result leaves me with more questions than what we started out. There is no compelling arguments for privatization of public services particularly. Either the public service will suffer, and this is, if we save a few dollars, the report card is still out as to whether or not there is efficiency in privatization. Post office has been threatened with this in Washington, and we've fought it in the 3 years that I've been in the Congress, and I think we've fought it off and waiting to see who takes over the next Congress, or whether we have the same kind of individuals who will be willing to stand up. I want you to know, where are the postal folks here? Postal workers are not here? They are. Clarence is here, right? I just want the postal workers to understand that you have one congressman here who will do everything I possibly can to fight against any effort to privatize the postal workers of this nation. It's wrong, and I'm against it. Period. $611 school districts in the state of New Jersey. And let me tell you something. I didn't come here to criticize the governor's effort to force us to take a look at some of the questions that we're facing today. I think it's admirable. I think it's very admirable. And if I criticize her when I think she's wrong, and on this point I think we should be looking at this to see where we can save money at a time when property taxes continue to soar and public servants get all the blame. In many cases, in many municipalities, municipal officials do not know how to control their budget and do zero-based budgeting. I do know, because of this transition period that we're going through, we can't get a handle on how many, for instance, firefighters we should have in many of our towns and how many we actually have. It would seem to me that the Department of Community Affairs, if they were doing their job, I remember when aid was dependent upon whether or not municipalities were able to reach their minimum amount of officers. Well, whatever happened to that guideline? So I read in some of the documentation that I looked at, and I think it's a good example. We're not all firefighters in this room, and there are many municipal employees that have nothing to do with firefighting, but I think it's a good example. I was looking at a proposed plan for northern Essex County, and I was comparing it to the plan in northern Hudson County of regionalizing our fire departments. That's a good example. It mirrors kind of the questions that Nina and I are struggling with, both on a state and national level. And I came across an idea which I thought really addresses or helps us to address some of the major problems that we're going to be facing. Because the plan ultimately, look at the Northern Hudson plan, it weeds out the older firemen through a buyout program. And I want to talk about that for a second. This is not unlike what we did 5 years ago in terms of forcing police officers to almost accept early retirement, early buyout, call it whatever you want. Now that all sounds good. You get rid of your top paying folks at the top, and then you can bring in some younger people at the bottom now that you're dropping the pay for entry-level firemen and police officers, in this case, cops. I believe it has had a debilitating effect on how police departments are run in New Jersey, because you've creamed off the administrative abilities, you've creamed off the experience that is absolutely necessary. You cannot function, and I'm going to use it as a verb, you cannot function a police department with a totally young force. It's impossible. It is impossible. I don't care how bright they are. You need to have experienced people, so buyouts and early retirements. This is one of the objectives. One of the objectives when you're dealing with regionalization, sharing of services. And I really question that objective, because while the community is saving money, obviously, if a 60,000 patrolman is leaving and one of 32,000 is coming in, or 24,000, depending on where you live in New Jersey, and likewise in terms of firefighters, where is the experience needed to be handed down to the other police officers and the other firefighters there? So it sounds good, sounds wonderful. It helps the community for a short period of time, but the community suffers in the long run in terms of providing services to the community when you do not have the experienced officers there to provide guidance to the other younger officers. I think that's critical. I think that's something we need to look at very, very, very carefully. Shared services to me sounds very good on the surface. Sounds wonderful. If it were going to save the community's money, then we'd really have to look at it. But most of the places where it's tried, it doesn't work, and it doesn't save money. And it causes more administrative problems. I look at one of the first towns in the United States to regionalize was Indianapolis. Mayor Lugar was the mayor, became a famous Republican senator from Indianapolis, Indiana. Mayor Lugar, and this was a Republican, and at that time, you know, cities and suburbs were in the middle of the Great Divide, which would dominate geopolitics for the next 30 years. He had the guts and the courage to talk about regionalization and providing services and making sure that Indianapolis was the hub and that these other suburban communities bought into it, making their services available. Most of those other towns had voluntary firefighters, for instance. So regionalization has many tentacles. And until 10 years ago, it was working. And all of a sudden, you couldn't get any volunteers. And so the fire departments that were volunteers started to have part-time paid firefighters. And in the next breath, we're looking towards a full-time fire department. If you don't think that's cultural shock to suburban communities who never knew what it was to pay for a fireman. I mean, you take the major cities in the state of New Jersey, They're paying between, the average city's paying between $15 million and $20 million per firefighter. And now suburban communities have never understood what happens in a city, how you put a budget together. And all I'm saying is that we need to be very careful about talking about shared services and all of the consequences that come from those shared services. I commend the governor and the legislature in trying to give incentives to those communities that can save money. But we cannot save money on the backs of experienced personnel that are needed, of increasing response times, of budgets that will go down over 2 years and inevitably go up in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth year. And we have a 2-year situation which evaporates very, very, very quickly. But we shouldn't be afraid of all of this. I want to conclude on this point, if I may, Tommy. Don. We should not be afraid of discussing and looking this in the eye. I was talking to firefighters before about the 24-hour day. It was something verboten and something you didn't even talk about 10, 15 years ago. Now we understand. We begin to understand the mind mechanism of being a fireman and how when you have to spread this out over a 7-day week, you are less effective in your job. And we understand a little bit more, and communities are becoming a little bit more responsive, a little bit more accepting of that idea and taking a look at it. Well, that means firefighters are going to work 3 days a week. We know how it works. We have documentation now. And myself, 10 years ago, I was hesitant about it, to be very, very honest with you. We should not be afraid of discussing ideas, of sharing services, of regionalization, but we need to look at the actual seats, the actual statistics, to see what's going to happen after the 3rd and 4th years. And I would advise firefighters here, and you know how close I am to you in terms of what I'm trying to do in Washington. I would not even discuss the issue in negotiations until every fire department is fully manned in this state. That's it. You're going to solve one problem and create 5 other problems. And now we have new OSHA rules. 3 in, 3 out. 2 in and 2 out. And what impact is that going to have on the firefighters of America? In volunteer departments, although it pertains mostly to cities, it pertains to everybody across the board, really. What effect is that going to have if we don't have enough firefighters out there? Communities can't even afford to put you in the proper equipment, with the proper equipment or the proper apparatus. It's so expensive now. What's the average fire truck cost? About $600,000, $700,000 of state-of-the-art? Am I far off? Remember, some small departments only had $1 million budget not that long ago. Here, one truck cost $700,000. The state-of-the-art. It's a different kind of fire we're fighting now than we did 20 years ago. People do not understand this. The average taxpayer needs to be educated what the public servant does and how he's helping the community. You cannot blame the average taxpayer if we're not communicating that to him or her. We want them on our side. We want them to be involved in the process. And with that, I would like to introduce I got time. Anybody want to ask questions? That's what I really came for anyway. Questions? Yes, sir.
I will also ask the question of Assemblywoman Gill because it applies here. You speak of regionalization and consolidation and how it impacts and how perhaps it is union busting of the worst order. Even more insulting is how it comes about through joint service agreements that the people of the communities don't even have a say in the matter. Where it was done in North Hudson, there wasn't one vote in any community as to whether the people were for it or against it. Yes, welcome dialogue. Yes, say, let's keep an open mind. Let's inform the public. But as you alluded to earlier, the public was told what was good for them without even having a say in the matter.
Let me respond this way. When I was mayor of the city of Patterson, I was mayor there for 7 years before running for Congress. I made it a principle of my administration that I never made a financial decision without sitting down to 21 unions I had to deal with in my city and telling them what's going on. This is where we are. This is where we were. This is where we are. And this is where we have to be, unless you want to lay off 100 cops and 100 firemen, et cetera, et cetera. When we understand what's going on, then you don't get into negotiations about regionalization with other towns, unless the bargaining unit is at the table also. And you know what? That conclusion will last a lot longer than one imposed. You know what I'm saying? That conclusion.
I'm even talking beyond the bargaining unit. I'm talking about the public.
Yeah,
It wasn't
absolutely.
It wasn't even a ballot issue. It wasn't even a referendum. It was done
Well,
without
because-
any input from the public whatsoever.
Because shared services, regionalization, and even privatization are cliche words where people say, oh, we're going to save money automatically. It doesn't happen that way. Doesn't happen. And it's interesting that in areas, for instance, school maintenance, I use this example because I had an experience with it. School maintenance, the folks working in the kitchens, providing the food for our children in many school districts, privatized them, they went right back. Why? Because the schools were filthy. When you get private services in that don't pay any sick time, any bereavement time, any health benefits, damn it, that's wrong. And we can't accept that. And if you accept it in one place, it's like part-timing America. That's why the UPS strike was such a critical strike. And frankly, I don't blame the management of UPS doing what they did. But I'm glad that those Teamsters stood up and said, no way, we're not going to do this, because that was the beginning of part-timing America. We'll have part-time firefighters, we'll have part-time cops, we'll have part-time teachers if we don't privatize them altogether also. So you should be at the table. The public should be at the table. No question about it. I feel very strongly about that. Another question.
In Essex County about privatization. Before I make my statement, I must commend Congressman PASCRELL and Assemblyman GILL. When Congressman PASCRELL was Assemblyman, there was a bill, 829 in the Assembly, that was tried to pass to privatize welfare in Essex County. If that bill would have passed, it would have given vendors to have 5-year contracts instead of 1, and that would have brought in companies like Lockheed Martin to make a profit off of people who in welfare you serve who are most in need. Now these companies were going to come in to make a profit out of people in need, but that was stopped. But you could see now through the county administration and the freeholder board, they changed the county code and created a new department through welfare to work to train recipients to get jobs. They have millions and millions of dollars. They took this function out of welfare, and you could see the results right now of getting individuals on assistance jobs. It's just not working out. The system should be brought back into welfare where the worker who's trained, has the education, can do this. And you could see right here, it just is not working.
I thank you for saying that, and I'll just quickly respond by saying we need to be careful on these specific issues. The fallout is tremendous. And this is not said in defense of the county administrator or any county administrator, but if you have an property tax system in the state of New Jersey, if that's the source of the problem, then go at the source. Because the county administrator, as well as the freeholders, as well as the mayor and council of every town, have the burden of trying to put this together. They send out the tax bills, not the congressman, not Nia Gill. They send the tax bills out. They get the grief. Now, they need to administer properly. They need to prune their budgets. But you got to give them the tools to do it. If they're starting off with 2 strikes against them when they're putting a budget together, that 3/4 of their budget is already committed. before they even get into the final quarter for the next year. They're behind the eight ball to begin with. So they're going to they're forced to try these schemes. They're forced to move to those gimmicks. And I hope that the dollars that the state is providing for us to take a look at some of these things, and we cannot, I'll repeat, we should not be afraid to look at them, because we're better than that. We should not be afraid to look it in the eye, but give us a chance to look them in the eye. We should not be afraid to address that. I think that if the dollars that the state is utilizing to really examine these things is an objective analysis, fine. But if you have the conclusion before the analysis, you're going to have major problems down the road. If not next year, 3 years from now. Yes, Don?
Something seems to me, I hear this all the time, and last year the Montclair Times had an editorial. One part of the editorial was talking about we should be looking at regionalization and shared services.
Don, can you use the mic?
Sure.
I can't hear you.
One part of the editorial in the Montclair Times last year said we should be looking into regionalization and shared services. And then they had a second section which was talking about we need to get rid of county government. To me, the county government is a regional authority, and everybody, we don't want it for what reasons? It's too political, it's too costly. So now we need another regional authority, besides the county. It doesn't make sense.
You bring up the issue of authorities. There is over 400 authorities in the state of New Jersey. There is no checks and balances for the most part on these authorities. And if we're going to begin the process of really pruning government, let's go to those authorities, where these folks have been appointed and they can do just about anything that they want. So then all kinds of mischief, which reflects back on the taxpayers themselves. Not only do public officials don't know what's going on in authorities, you can't blame the people for not knowing what's going on in authorities. These people are not elected. They have no checks and balances. In some of the major authorities in the state, the governor is the only checkoff. I don't recall, I think maybe twice in the last 10 years, you've had a governor who rejected the minutes of a meeting in terms of a decision that was made. One might have been with the casinos, and one was with the highway authority. Port authority? Port authority. I mean, talk about a dinosaur, the Port Authority. I mean, the only way we're going to put Giuliani in his place is if we have something to say on a real regional authority concerning all of the impact of the Port Authority. So my point is, we need to do very careful analysis here before we come to any conclusions. But those authorities are an albatross around the taxpayer's neck. Someday the bubble's going to burst. Now, about county government itself, I think there's going to be need of some kind of regional government to take care of hospitals and technical schools that counties usually do. But much of county government can be absorbed by the local communities if given the resources. If given the resources. Yes?
Congressman, if I could get you and Assemblywoman Gill to comment on the following. One of the reasons we're here is North Hudson Regional Fire Department is being championed throughout the state as this trophy of the politicians working together, and it's a prize that's being shown that regionalization really works. And I think the frustration that the firefighters up there feel is that the truth is this is a disaster. January 11th of 2000 will be 1 year anniversary. There's no mechanism to hire a firefighter under one contract. You still have 4 different.
How do you get promoted in that kind of contract?
There's no mechanism to be promoted. You have some towns who have lieutenants, some with captains. And the reason I would like to hear from Assemblywoman Gill, who really has been a champion of the labor force, is that the following week, next week, we'll be down at the League of Municipalities, and the League will be championing regionalization as this tremendous benefit to the community. We have a department of 370 firefighters, which now has 288 firefighters. And they're saying this is a safer environment, this is better for the citizens, it's better for the workforce. And I'd like to hear both your comments on that.
I have to go in a few moments, but I want to respond and I can near the microphone. Shared services is a lot different depending on where you go in this state. I see nothing wrong with those 5 towns, any 5 towns, joining together and doing joint purchases. There are some counties where local communities will join with their county to have joint purchases. That saves a lot of money. But that's a far cry in throwing public employees together from those same 5 towns, any 5 towns, and saying provide the same response time and services to your community that you're providing now. If you're not willing to make the sacrifices of providing the personnel to do the job. And so I would be very careful, but shared purchases in many areas has saved a lot of money. And there are many communities that are involved in that kind of activity. But the other thing is a very different situation. I just want to say I'm honored to have been here today. We've got many, many stops. When you're only home on a weekend, you got to try to make as many as you can. You know, and I am proud, and I wear this on my sleeve, that the collective bargaining agents, unions of this state can depend on me. And I'm no lapdog. You know that. We've gotten into the room and battled it out a lot of times. We don't agree on everything. But I will insist upon fairness. I will insist that we put all the facts on the table. And I will insist that we not try gimmicks at the expense of services to the public. They pay too many taxes in this state. And until we change the tax system, don't try to mess with gimmicks. I'm trying to give people the impression that you're trying to bring down costs. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have served with the congressman, and he was always a lightning rod for our caucus, so that he was a great mentor. And he's my congressman, even though I don't live in his district. Since I share his values, he represents me as well. I also am here today in probably 2 capacities. One, of course, as your state representative, but also as a taxpayer in Montclair. So the issue of regionalization and its impact on my taxes is extremely important. I guess I'd like to first start out by saying that 1199 is very dear to my heart because my mother, when she was about 45, which I considered ancient, went on the picket line in Mountain South Hospital to unionize. And I couldn't quite understand because most of the benefits although she would partake of them, most of the benefits would be for others who came in, and she always said she went on the picket line in order to make it better for the future and for those workers to come. I think when we talk about regionalization, we have to be very careful about defining the terms. And so, shared services, there are a number of ways to share services. One is regionalization, and the other is under interlocal agreements where you make a contract with another municipality to provide a service under a contractual relationship. The whole issue of regionalization and shared services, we have to look at the intended and the unintended consequences. First of all, the commission that studied this was supposed to be in relationship to tax relief. Understand that framework. The state, or Shakespeare may say, because the state's going to give, and we'll talk about that, certain kinds of money, but we always have to be very circumspect because we know that all that glitters is not gold. Now, the state wants this regionalization or discussion of it, and they say it's to help save property tax. The state reduced the income tax by 15%. Income tax was dedicated by the Constitution to schools and municipal aid. So that the discussion of regionalization and shared services is, if you look at the framework, the state's attempt to shift the responsibility of municipal aid to the municipalities. And if you analyze the purported savings in regionalization or shared services other than for trucks and things, it really appears to be, and I'm always open for discussion and debate, the elimination of jobs that gives the false impression in the first couple of years that the taxpayer is saving. And if you analyze, let's for one moment look at the privatization, and that was a buzzword. All the privatization, look at Parsons with the inspection. Parsons, they privatized it, we fought it, privatized the inspection. Parsons, in less than a year, has collected $500 million, twice what the state would have charged, and inspected half of the cars that the state did. Privatization is not saving money, it's a redistribution of wealth. Now, why do I say that? Look at the privatization that took place in the daycare centers, the state. They fired daycare workers, some of whom had previously been on welfare and gotten these jobs. They fired the daycare workers, and then they employed people at half the salary and no benefits. Because under privatization, the thrust is to demolish the workforce and give the people at the top high wages. Now, has privatization worked in the state? Absolutely not. We understand that the state also privatized the state cleaning force. And we discovered that the person who had the contract, in order not to pay decent wages, hired illegal aliens that was cleaning the governor's office. And once that was discovered, they had to take a look at that. Now in Montclair, so privatizing public employees' jobs simply shifts the wealth to whoever is in power and their friends want the contract. And we have seen it repeatedly and repeatedly. And most of that money does not go to people who live even in our state, look at Parsons, or sometimes in our community. I approach this issue of regionalization and shared services as a taxpayer who pays a lot of taxes in Montclair. But I'd like to add that we get lots of benefits in Montclair. I see Mr. Reedy in the back. And so, really, let's take a look at it. Regionalization means that the municipalities, and let's take, for instance, how about the fire department as an example, they merge into a different entity called the joint meeting. So no longer would you have a Montclair Fire Department or East Orange or Belleville. They merge into a different entity. And the state says, we will give you money to entice, as the congressman said, certain people to leave. I think it's 20, 25 and out, but we will give you money on the short-term basis. Why? Because once you get rid of those people, you will see an immediate false reduction in expenditures. Once you get into this joint meeting and you share these services, your assets in the town become part of this joint thing, if it's your firehouse or whatever. And you have particular issues. What this state will do, and here's where I think the unions have to be very vigilant. The state says, we will give you money to study the issue, which is, I think, probably where Montclair is now. And the state will give you the first $15,000 because you hire a consultant. We will pay 90% thereafter, and the conglomerate, whoever the towns are, will pick up the other 10%. It is within the total discretion of the municipality as to who will participate in the debate with the consultant. The unions must be at that table. Not later, after the consultant's report comes out. Because I'm also an attorney, and you know, they say you can get an expert witness to say anything, but you have to be at that table right then and there. This Montclair should not be allowed to engage a consultant without the unions reviewing the qualifications and the specifications and the questions that the town will put to the consultant to answer. Because it will be the questions that can give you the result. So on that basis, you better be at the table. We must demand it, and we must demand also that the public is at the table in that debate. Once you do the study, and some people say it takes about 3 years to complete the study, I think you will find, because in Hudson County, real issues of beginning to attempt to pit bargaining units against bargaining units. For example, and there's nothing in the state law to guide you on this issue. If you are going to join forces with civil service employees in a town that has non-civil service, what do you do in terms of seniority and promotion? For a person in a non-civil service town who's been there 25 years, and if you adopt civil service rules, they may well go back to the end of the line. And what does that do? That pits bargaining units against bargaining units. And so the way and the approach that the unions take, you cannot do it to create a wedge between each other. It is the intended or unintended consequence. Because when you look at regionalization and shared service, it appears to be, and I'm always open for debate. I'm always open to debate too. But it appears to be a very insidious backdoor method to destabilize the union. So we need to be there on that in interlocal agreements where you have a contractual relationship to serve as another community. Only if that other community has civil service, the employees, there is nothing in the law that will guide you as how to bring those other employees into the town and where they fit in terms of the employment force, in terms of seniority and all the other things. So you can now, even under interlocal, have the same kind of divisiveness between unions that you can have in regionalization. Regionalization, it appears, will fire some people or have you leave. Because it's my understanding, and I may be wrong, that in regionalization, and when you regionalize, at the end of your collective bargaining agreement, they need not continue it. That's my understanding. But that for the regionalization, once you get into the joint meeting, and let's say we agree that Montclair and everybody's going to be together. In 5 years down the line, Montclair says, well, wait a minute, this isn't really helping us. Because what they're doing is, the first couple of years we had a savings, and now it doesn't quite seem so effective anymore because in order to keep up this false sense of saving money, we have 2 firefighters doing the job of 5, and so how is that really effective in terms of my safety? 5 years down the line when Montclair, if Montclair, or East Orange, or Belleville, finds out we don't like it, well, it's almost too bad on you. Because you are, and there's few guidelines in the law of how you can get out of this kind of joint meeting because you have committed assets of the town, fire departments, firehouses, in addition to, if we try to get out now, because we find that it's not working, Montclair now has to do what? Develop a whole nother fire department. And so this is not an issue, in closing, that we can deal with lightly. Because it's not like a bad relationship or a bad partnership. Once you get into it, you are there, and the consequences to get out have serious ramifications on the taxpayers. Are we open for discussion? Yes. But at that discussion, we must have the unions helping to define the questions, the terms, what they're looking at, and we cannot be involved in buzzwords and semantics. I want real tax savings in Montclair. I want my tax bill to go down, not at the expense of efficiency in my town, but because we are having real savings. And one way our tax bill will go down is we have to look at the way we are taxed in our reliance on property taxes. We may have to say, Christy, the $350 we got, I guess they couldn't even buy kids sneakers anymore. The $350 we were able to receive, we got caught up in the buzzword. We have to accept that responsibility, and then we have to talk about real tax reform. This is ultimately to undermine our unions and not to make our services more effective. We are looking at the intended consequences, and those are the ones that are on the paper, and we are looking at the unintended consequences. And you are the unintended consequences of what will happen under regionalization and shared service. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Hi. Hey, I don't have a question, but I would like to make an announcement. I see my friend Bill Lavin from the state FMBA here. I would like to announce that today and next Saturday, over radio station WFME 94.7 FM, both myself, Bill Lavin, and Chief Huber from the Irvington Fire Department are going to host a discussion on the issue of regionalization of the fire department. So it's this afternoon at 6 p.m. and next Saturday afternoon at 6 p.m. WFME 94.7 FM. I hope most of you will tune in. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
This is more on a state level. Mike Infante from Bloomfield. The governor has bonded hundreds of millions of dollars to give us that $350 and $130. So she's taking it out of one pocket, she's putting it in another. We have all this bonding. The way it looks to me is the next governor, be it man or woman, Democrat or Republican, is going to have to raise our taxes again because we're going to have to start paying these bonds down. And of course, you're not only taking the money that you would put towards our pension or the teacher's pension or the state workers' pensions that now you've bonded that money for, now you have to pay interest on those bonds. So more and more of our tax money is going towards bonds and interest in the future. Her whole economic scheme, there's a lot of smoke there. And I don't think the people, the taxpayers of Montclair or Bloomfield or the state of New Jersey realize that their taxes are going to go up again in the future, and they're going to blame the next governor. It's not going to be the next governor's fault.
Well, I know I won't be the next governor.
Neil, in today's Ledger, there's a very good article about this whole issue of bonding, and it talks about at the start of this governor's administration, the average debt per person was about $861. Right now, it's approaching almost $1,500 a person. So you can appreciate the amount of debt that's accumulated. I think the figure they're talking now is up about $14 billion from a period of about 8.6 during the early days of our administration. So a lot of these issues with money, the public, unfortunately, sometimes they don't think about tomorrow. They're taking this lifesaver program with a small rebate and not really looking at the big picture, because it just seems there's more and more reliance on property taxes, and that's why town officials here in Montclair and other municipalities are really getting pressure from the homeowners, and it's not really fair because, like you said, they've cut back so much on support for municipalities and education, and at the same time driving up local property taxes.
And with the question about the bonding, and although we fought it in the governor's last bonding effort, when the governor didn't put it on the ballot, and that was so that there would be no public input with respect to it. But I think what's becoming increasingly important is that our constituency, we have to help educate our neighbors who are not necessarily part of the labor movement or who perceive this issue to be a tax-saving device. We really have to do that at every turn, because what happens, and this is what they bank on, is that your voice will not be heard and your position will not be heard in the public debate. That you will come in later after, is the barn door open or closed? I can't remember, but after, and then you will look reactive. So what we have to do, and that's why I think this Montclair Labor Coalition is so important, is we have to engage other people to come and talk. When we have a problem with, they know I sit on the Senior Citizens Committee, but when there's an issue of schools and taxes in Montclair, we have the discussion with the seniors to let them know that what happens if you don't have good schools, your property value goes down, because we have seniors who are property rich and cash poor. But no one talks to them about their stake in a good school system and what that means. And once you do, and once you make that link, then you have formed an ally for the larger fight with respect to property taxes. And that's what we have to go to people who have no relationship to this. because we have allowed not only the press, but in our discussions, we have sort of allowed public employees to be demonized as the scapegoat for the failure of property tax relief. We have allowed it. So we have to reach out and explain, not in terms of this affects my job, because nobody wants to hear that, right? But this affects you. This will affect your property taxes in the long run. So I think we should take a position as we want to let you know what this does to you, and we have to put the focus on their interest, because if we talk about it just in terms of saving jobs, which is important, we will not reach out and be able to form those coalitions so people can begin to understand.
Well, you and the congressman spoke in terms of having labor included in the process of discussing regionalization and joint services, and that's essential. I understand that. What's important, though, is that the answers to the questions that are posed are there. What we have seen in some instances is that administrations embrace the concept of regionalization, but don't have the concrete answers. So though they will listen to your questions and they will say that that's a valid concern, they may not in fact have the answers for such things as vested benefits over a 20-year career with 5 or 10 years remaining. Now, whose obligation is it? Is it the obligation of the former employee or the current employee? And it becomes, greater mind than mine has spoke about not being able to serve 2 masters. Try serving 4 or 5 or 6. It becomes finger pointing and confusion. So they have to have the answers first before they should even be allowed to enter into it.
Well, I think we have, of course, in the discussion that will come, and I also think that if they can't give you the answers, then perhaps that means that we should not enter into this. So, not being able to answer long-term impact questions may make the municipality pause to say, well, maybe we should not even get involved at this moment, because we're going to enter into a long-term relationship. We're not talking about, and you're right, you're not talking about the short-term impact.
Health benefits.
If the municipality cannot answer questions on the long-term impact, when they're getting into a long-term relationship, then perhaps that relationship should not be entered into. And I'm quite sure, and the township manager is here, that Montclair citizens will ask those hard questions. Not only will the union, but we will be there asking those questions. And if we don't get an answer, or if an answer can't be given, then that may mean we should look at it in a different method and manner.
Yes, Assemblywoman, I can't tell you how refreshing it is from labor's point of view to hear you speak, a member of General Assembly, to speak the way you are today. We were beginning to think that we were crazy, so either you're as crazy as we are, or you have the courage to say these things. And I think just to give an example of how ambiguous that government can be at times, in North Hudson, the congressman read about how they want to weed out the older, the 20, the guys who can't do the job, the 20 and better people, that this will be a positive thing. We have a pension bill that it would put us on par with the State Troopers Association, and we see government in that aspect say, well, we don't want to lose our best and brightest of 20 and over, because if we lose them, we'll be devastated. So are we weeding out the old, or will we be devastated with the best and brightest? And I think that's a perfect example of how government uses the argument in cases to their advantage when it is to their advantage.
Well, being a 52, we, the best and brightest could still be the oldest. So I But it is my understanding, and I'd like to ask a question for the people in Hudson, that firefighters who were originally from different towns are now doing the same job but being paid at a different salary. So you could be doing the same job as a person next to you. You could be paid $35,000 and that person can be paid $50,000, and there has been no mechanism to increase the salaries or make them level based upon the jobs they're doing. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
It's the collective bargaining process. What it is, it will be ultimately arbitrated.
So that also is an issue to contend with, because in a town who may have, I would assume, used to pay 35, then now you may have to kick in more money in order to bring people up to the same level.
The starting times of the different towns have not even been jointly worked out. You have one town working at 8 o'clock and another town comes in at 7:30. You know, all the simplest things. And as I said, PERC and Department of Personnel have no idea how to get these things done. And we're after the fact. This is trying to patch up a bad situation because of, you know, the regionalization, which you can't even find in the dictionary. It comes up, no suggestions.
Are there any more questions or any comments?
I just want to say, like this, echo what this gentleman said about Nebraska, Local 196, represent the Garden State Parkway, Atlantic City Expressway, City of Asbury, Cape May, and Mattawan. Just to echo what this gentleman says, we're very fortunate to have people like yourself and Congressman PASCRELL, who I know, and I know I ran for the Assembly this year in District 26. It wasn't, we weren't successful. We weren't going to say we lost, but you know, the bottom line is that we got to keep the education of labor and of the working families, you know, as a front burner issue. But like this gentleman said from Bloomfield, it's a pure shell game. You know that better than I do, being down there in the Assembly, that the governor was cutting taxes or something that they were doing there, 30%. But then they cut discretionary aid to the municipalities. And the bottom line is this: you got a governor and a Republican administration, we'll call them, all of them, the Assembly and the Senate, who, bottom line is, they just don't care. They laid it on the backs of the towns, of the mayors and councils, whether Democrat or Republican, and they had to raise your taxes in your town. So it's all the shell game what they're doing. And by the way, privatization is welfare for the rich. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leah. Leah just gave away my age. I was going to say that we used to sit next to each other in high school. She was always seemed very quiet, right? She was obviously paying attention.
She must have skipped a few grades.
Definitely. Thanks, Dan. I want to thank you all for coming. A couple of announcements, first of all. We have our Township Manager, Terrence Reedy here. Pat McNally, the Essex County Clerk, is here. Jessica DeConnick, also our Councilwoman from Montclair. And Don Zeef was also here, Councilman. There was someone was telling me that there's some people have gotten tickets outside. If that's true, we can bring them back in and maybe we'll help you pay for them if you want to bring them in. Yes. Okay. The last thing is I want to thank Clarence Jackson and Richie Burrell. They've been a great help. Clarence is from the Postal Workers and Richie is here from AFSCME. And Clarence, I believe, has a list outside, especially for people from Montclair. There have been a lot of people who have expressed interest in getting together with the Montclair Labor Coalition on different events. Nancy Miller, you just said it to me the other day. If you want to put your name, address, phone number there, maybe we can contact you because we're planning on doing some other forums and events in the near future. All right, thank you all for coming.